tech. I think that's
and Becky or Sarah, over to you.
Okay, shall I start with a little bit about me? I did a manufacturing systems engineering degree, but did some postgrad work where I started coding and I loved it. So I've been a developer ever since. I spent most of my career at IBM in a variety of roles, mostly developer related, also some consultancy and some level 3 support, so fixing bugs. And then since I left IBM, I've been working in smaller businesses, and most recently I've set up my own business, which is one of the reasons I know Becky. I'm quite unusual in being still, although I'm also a founder, I'm still a developer. I still do a lot of code writing for myself and some for other people. And that is one of the things I noticed, and one of the things that pushed me out of IBM was how few women there were left who had stayed in those core technical roles. That there's kind of a drift of women leaving the industry, but there's also a drift within the industry of women becoming less technical, so they take on project management or people management roles. And that kind of kicked me into starting to want to talk about these things, which up to that point I'd tried very carefully to avoid. But it seemed like there's a problem, and if anything, it's certainly not been very much improved, but it's almost getting worse. So we'll come back to me in a bit, because I've made some notes on a few of the hints and tips to be a better diversity ally. Obviously, most of the examples and the thoughts are from the point of view of women, because that's my particular issue in the IT industry. But it's true that all forms of diversity need allies at the moment. If you're disabled, if you're Black, if you're neurodiverse, there are so many ways in which the world is difficult for some people to navigate. So with that, I'll hand over to Becky for her background.
Hi everybody, lovely to see you here this evening. I know it's tea time as well, so feel free to dive into a banana or a bag of crisps if you want to eat something. Feel free to do so, don't want to be passing out. My name is Becky Lodge. I'm both degree and Chartered Institute Marketing qualified. Before I started up my business in 2015, I was an international sales and marketing director in a plethora of companies across the globe. Predominantly, I've been in STEM industries for the majority of my 25-year career before starting up. And I'm one of the elusive women in STEM that are talked about but are often never seen, like a rare sighting of a red squirrel. I'm one of Sky News 100 Women in Business to Watch, which was an accolade that I won in 2017 for my work in gender parity across the startup landscape and SME business growth landscape in the UK. And I'm also just a huge advocate of diversity and inclusion of any type. The rare breed that believes that in order for women to win, other people don't have to lose. And also it's about creating a collaborative space within business where people can feel comfortable irrespective of where they come from and what they want to do. I think I'm with Sarah in that we come from a generation of what I call the Thatcherite children. We were told that greed was good in the 1980s, and actually it's the big problems that started in the 1980s are actually becoming prevalent in our society now. And the pandemic has just sort of ironed over the cracks and revealed them, hence the great resignation and the great exodus of a lot of people like myself and Sarah from corporate, because our experiences haven't been particularly positive, because the world certainly was not geared in our favour, still is not geared in our favour, and gender parity in the UK will take about another 50 years. So as I jokingly said to Phil and Sarah yesterday, I'll be in the sunshine years retirement home in my HSL chair by the time that happens. But I will still be fighting for it to happen, because I believe that businesses can become more profitable because of inclusion and diversity, but we need to actually start to work with people around awareness of how they change things, because change is terrifying for everybody. We don't like it. We're very British. We have a very stiff upper lip mentality to wanting to change things. So really, it's a debate today, and please pop your questions or any thoughts in the chat, and we'd love to hear what you're thinking about as well, in terms of how you found it, because we've got some other ladies on here who would like to perhaps express and cheer when we say things. It happens a lot when we do these types of talks. And I'll come back to Sarah just to talk briefly through the slide deck we've got, We have got a lot of content, so we might skip through some of it depending on how the debate goes, and bringing you in to our discussion is absolutely key, because I want to see how you feel as much as how Sarah and I feel. So thanks very much for coming this evening.
Sarah, you're on mute, I'm afraid.
Thanks. Yes. Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Becky. And do ask questions if you need to. And I think Phil's watching the chat for us. So why do we need allies? So this is a statistic I was very familiar with when I was job hunting, that there aren't many computer science graduates who are women in the UK. It's been around about a fifth for a long time. And it was 19% according to this statistic in 1999. And the amazing thing is that in 2018, it was pretty much the same. So this is 19-ish% in comp sci, and again, 19-ish% in engineering and technology. I've been involved in a lot of initiatives, especially among teenagers, which is a sensible age to start. And I think as well, there's a bit of, oh, there's not another initiative. I've lost count of how many I've been involved in, going and talking in schools, mentoring 14-year-olds, because that's around the age in the UK where girls stop studying sciences or stop being interested in sciences. Whatever those initiatives are, sadly, they haven't worked. So that isn't to say we shouldn't have them, but we should look at making sure they're valuable and stopping them if they're not working, if they're not having an impact. Phil very helpfully curated this data for us. And this is women directors registered with Companies House. And it's settling on around about a quarter-ish in some areas, which is kind of good. But one of the scary things, if you look at the right-hand column, is that the number in the middle, which is from the 1980s and 90s, suggests things were improving. We went up from sort of a quarter to heading towards a third. And then since 2000, it's been going back down again. And that matches what I was experiencing in the industry, which was it seemed like it was going to go the right way at the point where I joined IT. And the longer I stayed there, the less convinced I was that that was what was happening. This is a much smaller set of data, so it's not as reliable a stat. And it's also specifically, so it was a curated list of Southern tech top 150 companies in the South in technology. It was not created by us, but it was sent to TechSolent as a spreadsheet. And it's possible that picking only larger companies has affected this data. It's very likely that the fact that it's specifically tech companies has affected this data. But basically, as a tech founder looking for mentors, of that list of, it was actually 130 in the end on the spreadsheet. I don't know if they truncated it. There were 5 women. So I looked them all up and I've tried to connect with them all on LinkedIn, because there's a real shortage of role models in the industry for me. So even though there have been lots of initiatives, and I don't at all want to deny that, and quotas and all sorts of bits and pieces, well, the reason we're still asking for allies is they haven't worked. So we need to be doing something different and looking for the things that do work. This is a lovely quote from Arlen Hamilton. It says, "I'm here to tell you that having privilege or being privileged is not the problem. Entitlement is the problem." So I have an awful lot of privilege because I'm white and middle class. And I know that every time I walk into a posh restaurant or a posh hotel, that I will get polite treatment because of that. And as soon as, even if there's a push, sales team sort of following you around the shop, which they do occasionally, as soon as they say, "Can I help?" and I say, "I'm just browsing, thank you," they go away. And I know that's privilege. And if I didn't work in IT, I might even not have thought about my lack of privilege. But Arlen is a really good person to make this statement, because she is female, she is Black, and she's working class. And that's, 2 of those privileges that I have that she doesn't. And in spite of all that, she's actually become the founder of a venture capital firm, which is just amazing. And she's an inspiration for me. And she's here to say it doesn't matter if that's not you, if you didn't come from the more difficult end of the privilege spectrum, you can still be an ally. You can still be a perfectly fine human being, and nobody's wanting to say that you're a problem. It's only a problem if you assume that everyone else has the same level of privilege, which is one flavor of entitlement. So other people may have extra obstacles in their life. So some tips for helping. Mentoring is great, but it's not a diversity fix. I haven't got quoted statistics, but there's been several studies that say mentoring programs do not have an impact on career progression. Sponsor programs do. So if your company's introduced a mentoring program and goes, right, we've solved diversity, remind them that they might not have done, but they could have another go and introduce a sponsor program. And for those of us who are technical, often you're going to end up with a male sponsor because that's who they all are, all the senior execs or the senior technical leaders. And we need to just be conscious that anyone can be a sponsor. They don't have to look like you. They just need to be an ally, that's all.
Sarah, sorry, can I ask a question? How do you differentiate between the sponsor and mentor program there? What's the definition?
A sponsor is an executive sponsor.
Right, okay, cool.
And a mentor is more likely to be a peer or perhaps one level senior to you. And a mentor as well will have chats about your day-to-day stuff, whereas a sponsor might well be looking out for career opportunities that are coming up. They might be able to give you some pointers on putting in promotion cases. They should have an ear to the ground on the future strategy and direction of the company, and therefore where are the good places to be positioned. It's all that kind of thing that makes a difference that a peer mentor just can't. So thanks for that, Phil. That was a good question. Look out for your metaphors. In sport, there can only be one winner. That reinforces competitive and comparative thinking. So consider the arts. Is Chimamanda Adichie a better author than Abdul Razak Gurnah? Is Steven Spielberg make better films than Martin Scorsese? You know, we can have the debate about the Beatles versus the Rolling Stones, but they're kind of debates that go on forever because it doesn't matter. There is always room for the next great novel, the next great film, the next great song. It turns out actually business is quite like that. It's not perhaps quite as close, because if you're in a specific company and you're looking at a specific senior role, there will be competition for that, and there will be this thing that, oh well, only one person can have that role, which feels like you're in the sporting world, you know, so you're in some ladder where you get eliminated until the final, you know, like a tennis tournament. But actually there's always room for another new business. Someone who's very good at what they do and gets blocked, they might go off and set up their own company. In a growing business, there might be new roles. In my industry, for example, we started with CTO, Chief Technology Officer. There's now CIO, Information Officer, CSO, Security Officer. And smaller companies won't need all of those, larger ones will. So there'll be points where there's a growth and there's a new role. And someone who's great, who didn't have a role to go to a few years ago, might have one now. And in the career, there's always opportunities to change companies. So if you're on the mentoring or sponsoring side for someone who's really good or has some, you know, brilliant insights into some areas, have a think around about what could they do with those if their obvious route up is blocked. Think about where they could go next. Becky, I'm going to pause and ask you about hiring diversely, because that's always the question, isn't it? Well, if I want more women in my company, where do I go and how do I hire them?
Yeah, I think I'm not a particular fan of initiatives or quotas, because I don't actually believe it solves things in the longer term. And also, when we kind of look at the companies that I've been involved with in the past, especially in engineering infrastructure, we were very much wanting to go out and actually recruit more women, but there was no female apprentices out there. The local colleges and the local education providers weren't actually encouraging girls in the education system to think about these careers. And as Sarah said before, it's about getting into the education system and pipeline as much as it is about doing stuff when people are actually getting their first or their second jobs or their first starts. So for me, a creeping 100-year-old education system in the UK, which is designed people for the sausage factory of 9 to 5 being shackled to your desk, is already woefully out of date. And we're seeing this with the advent of the 100-year event, the event as we call it, with the COVID pandemic, and we're seeing it reflected in the Great Resignation. So I think the problem for me starts much sooner, often from childhood. I mean, I remember when I was a kid and I lived in a place called Glenfield, just outside Leicester, and there's a lad 3 doors down called Matthew Thompson, and I was about 6 or 7. And I was really into climbing trees and investigating things and really doing what would be quite tomboyish things, which was something that I was labelled and he had an action man with eagle eyes, and I ended up flushing my Cindy down the toilet with frustration because I actually wanted an action man with eagle eyes, and I didn't want Cindy. And I think that we're actually streamed from that very beautiful age into how we're going to be perceived as we get older. And I think as I've come through my career as well, my experience has often been that if I'm in female-dominated environments now, because I've been brought up in male-dominated environments during my career, that for now, female environments are a problem for me, or gender parity environments or education environments, because I'm considered to be too blunt or too analytical. So I think the stems in society much wider about what we're assigning to women as their behaviours and what our expectations of how women should look, how women should dress, that they're aggressive, I've been called bossy, I've been called all sorts of things. But if I was a guy, I'd be called assertive or I'd be called ambitious. So I think we have to be very, very mindful that this is, a consideration when we're hiring organisations that are typically male dominated, that they're looking to bring people around themselves, so they look at the behaviours that they already have in the organisation. So the status quo is still the same.
It's Becky. It's always very tempting to hire people like you. I thought I was doing really well about my gender balance, and then I realised nearly everyone I was hiring was former IBMer. So.
Yeah, I think, and I do think it is very difficult. I think SMEs have different challenges because they tend to be less diverse and less inclusive than often big corporates are. Because big corporates have a gender around this, they realise that it's a thing, and they are obviously trying to legislate because they want to become more profitable. It's as simple as that. If you have a more diverse workforce, it's a more profitable workforce, and also it's just a nicer place to work. Because if everybody looks the same, how is that going to be a great place to work? How are you going to drive innovation? How are you going to actually change things? You're not. So
Becky, just I think a few people are having a few problems hearing you. I don't know what's happened with your microphone, but it's
okay.
Yeah.
Is that any better? Is that any better or not?
Yeah, that's a little bit better. Yeah, I think it must be an issue with your mic somewhere.
Yeah, sorry, I'll have to investigate that later on. Can everybody hear me now? Is that
that's fine. Thanks, Becky.
Yeah, okay. So I think it is a case of just being aware that it is a minefield, and I think also that women have to talk more and have more representation, because if we want to have a voice, we have to actually raise the bar, and we have to raise our heads above the parapet and actually be heard. So it's no good sort of huffing and puffing in the background if we're not willing to stand up and say, look, we want things to change. But that can even be challenging, because there's been work environments in the past where I've tried to challenge or attempted to challenge, and then of course the status quo and the majority are male, and then, oh well, no, that's not true, or you're discredited, or it just doesn't happen because it's seen as well, it's a really nice idea, Becky, but there's always a barrier, there's always a but, there's always a cost involved, or it's too expensive, or actually our customers wouldn't like it. And I think that is also prevalent in organisations where they don't embrace innovation, where they don't embrace change. So you see the manifestation of staying the same is easier than actually, taking a risk. And that's a very British thing as well, is we don't want to take too many risks because it might cost us money. And actually we do need to start being more inclusive so that we can take more risks. And I think really in terms of hiring, you have to look at your processes. Is that inclusive? Are you hiring and putting out a job description that is overly lengthy and wordy, and to somebody who's neurodiverse might not appeal at all? Is it actually the words that you're using? Is the terminology and language that you're using? There's a whole raft of things here around tone of voice, of how you're scripting your stuff, and actually the language that you're using that might not appeal to certain audiences as well. I mean, if you're certainly using the word ninja, like IT ninja, then that's not going to appeal to somebody that's neurodiverse. So you have to be very, very careful about how you're you're clarifying everything that you're doing in your hiring process. What I would say is get specialists in to do it. There are, you know, cultural specialists to actually help hire now with neurodiversity. There's some brilliant work now by a woman called Professor Amanda Kirby around neurodiversity and women, and also Kate Briggs on dyslexia as well. So if you there is help out there, and there's a lot of CICs, a lot of social enterprises set up to help, you know, to help with these kind of things. But it's just sort of going out and being inquisitive in terms of hiring, and ask people, ask women, do you think that this is appropriate? Do you think this would appeal? And just ask for help. And I think it's, you know, us working together that will make that change quicker and actually less painful.
Becky, you mentioned aggressive. I have had one of those famous reviews, or at least they're famous among women, where you get feedback at the same time saying you're both too quiet and too aggressive. And if you find there's somebody in your organization with that feedback, what it probably means is nobody's asking them for their opinions. So you either have to interrupt to give your opinion, or you don't at all. So nobody's, you know, in a team meeting, nobody's making space for some people. And it, by the way, this isn't by any means always women, but there are some people probably from some diverse community or other in the room who aren't being asked for their opinion, who aren't being asked for their ideas. And then they either go very quiet and get disenfranchised because it's just not interesting, or like if you want to speak up, you find you have to barge in to do it, and then you end up with that double feedback.
Yeah, I think what happens is that with a lot of women, and it is a generalization, but it's true in my experience, lots of women that are neurodiverse will sit at the back of the room and observe because it's the way that they process information. And it doesn't mean that they're not paying attention. Or if people have ADHD, they could be doing something else at the same time, and people think that they're not actually engaged, but it's the only way that their brains can process information is by fiddling about with something else at the same time. So I think it's inviting people to join in. And I always say that the person you need to worry about the most is the person that's the quietest in the room, because they're either planning their global world domination, or they've probably got the best idea, but they just haven't been allowed to have a voice. And as Sarah and I discussed this yesterday, in male-based organizations, you tend to start off by hierarchy. So it'll be, if there's a sales meeting, the sales director will have the first say, then all the men will get asked in the room, and the women tend to get left till last and marginalized or shoved in before the tea or the coffee break, or they get the 30 seconds because the men have dominated the conversations and have spent too long talking. So I think actually, in terms of hiring and how to run meetings, it's about literally giving everybody a 4 or 5 minute slot and then making them stick to it. And you know, and then drawing out different ideas from people is absolutely key, and asking the quieter people if they would like to lead on a meeting, if it's something that they feel that they are capable of doing with support if they are neurodiverse, because it's good practice for helping with confidence and helping people learn to hear their own voice, which can, for neurodiverse people, be terrifying. As you know, to speak for any prolonged period of time is actually terrifying for an introvert. To be centre stage is terrifying for an introvert. So, and for women especially, we see that even though the skill sets tend to be incredibly high, the self-confidence and self-esteem can often be very low. And I see this all the time in our startup community. We have women who have come out of corporate careers, who are 25, 30-year career veterans who don't have a great deal of confidence in their own abilities. And it's because they haven't been given confidence in their abilities in corporate. They haven't been encouraged in the same way. They haven't been promoted in the same way that men have. And the reason that there's a mass exodus now from corporate is because, 25 years of not feeling comfortable in an environment, who in their right mind would want to stay there? These worlds aren't engineered for women. They're not engineered for diverse, for diverse representation. So if I feel like this, as Sarah said earlier, as a white middle class, once upon a time working class, born in inner city Leicester woman, how do other people feel who don't have the same amount of privilege as we've had, an opportunity? It must be absolutely terrifying. because I mean, Sarah and I were talking again about this yesterday. The amount of sexual harassment that we had in our 20s was insane. You know, I was taken to meetings because I was told that they were more likely to close the deal because I was the right type of person that the customer might find attractive, and maybe I could take him out for a drink on my own, and maybe that would help, you know, close the deal. And did I want to keep my job? And this, you know, this is in the last 25 years, so we haven't progressed from the 1890s really. And as Sarah said, I think we've seen in the stats earlier, we're cycling back to the old practices again. So we talked about female emancipation in the 60s and 70s, the advent of contraception, and actually it seems to be going totally the other way. And that's what I find incredibly disappointing, I think, a lot of the time. But we have to start to change things. It's just as simple as that.
We do. I'll talk a little bit more about a couple of things you can do as an ally. When you're describing someone and you don't know their gender, use the neutral ones, use they and them. So there's a new lawyer starting next week. Do we have a desk ready for them? And it's funny how, because I take the view that the vast majority of bias is unconscious. Most people don't set out to make life difficult for minorities. And so doing things like using neutral language, it helps you to be a smidge more conscious in a way that fixes some of your unconscious biases. Because I'm really guilty of this one, by the way. I've been dreadful at assuming that the next lawyer I'm meeting is about to be a male. And then, of course, it doesn't at all have to be. And that little nudge to, oh, hang on, this might not be a stereotype person. This could be some other kind of person, a minority person. And similarly, if you know this person, and try not to use a label like black or disabled or trans, it reinforces an internal stereotype, and instead describe their clothing or something, or where they're positioned in the room, something that is neutral about their characteristics. So which one is the doctor? The one in the blue shirt. Give diverse team members stretch work. There's now starting to be quite well known that women are paid less on average than men, and that they struggle to ask for pay rises. I go back a little bit further than that. One of the reasons we struggle to ask for pay rises is I have worked in teams where I wasn't being given work, either not being given work at all. That can be a thing in consultancy. When there isn't enough work, I end up on the bench. Or in some teams, I'm being given work that's administrative or boring or legacy, where my peers are being given more interesting work, more creative and developer tasks. So have a mental review in your organization. Are those with lower privilege doing more administrative tasks? If you've got a new project coming up, you'll often hear a conversation as well among senior management, oh, we can't find anyone because all the good people that we already know about are already tied up on other projects. Well, try all the good people you don't already know about. There's probably some out there, and if you start to think more diversely around who have I got in the organization, you might find someone new, and you might find that they're up to it. It's amazing how stretch goals can really help people. And that helps as well a bit to counteract the thing where women like, I have to be able to do a good thing before I can go and ask. I have to have 100% of the skills in this job ad before I can go and apply for it. But if someone assigns them to a piece of work, they'll probably take it on. It's more likely than if you expect them to jump up and volunteer themselves. I never got taken to coffee meetings by senior management, or even immediate management. And my assumption is, I don't know this for sure, this is just my guess from it, that senior male managers only take other men to coffee, probably because they're scared. And senior female managers don't take anyone to coffee because they're too busy and they don't want to be seen taking time out of their away from their desk when there's a mountain of paperwork on it. If you're in a senior role, whoever you are, please take people to coffee. It's really like sponsorship programs. It's a way in which you get to know what your team are like and the ideas they're not speaking up in public about because they're not given the space, or they're scared, or they're not feeling confident about that. It's their chance to quietly talk to you about their ideas, about the strategy, about where things are going. And if you're worried about, as a man, about taking a woman to coffee, there's a few notes here that just can help it to be more clear that this is just another work conversation. So yeah, announce it ahead of time so there's a chance for people to anticipate and to see that everyone in the team is doing something similar. Meet in an open place. Imagine you're sitting next to Gordon Brown. How close would you sit to them? What topics would you think were appropriate? You know, that is who you are to someone junior. You're both politically and physically more powerful, probably, if you're a man. And then ask questions. If you've got a problem or a challenge coming up, whether it's how to hire diversely or how to what's going on with a particular project that's not going well, ask them what they think, how they would approach the problem. And if everything is going really well in your business, in which case, wonderful, ask about possible future snags. What should we be looking out for in case things don't go so well? So thank you for being an ally. And I'm pretty sure if you're here, that's what you want to be, is to set out and do more.
I think there's something very interesting on the last slide about in the advent, unfortunately, of things with Sarah Everard recently, which was men are worried that women will laugh at them, women are worried that men will kill them. And I think that is a very, very important thing that men need to bear in mind, which is
men are also worried of being accused of
they
harassment.
are, yeah. And also, let's put it this way, if you had to sit next to Donald Trump or Gordon Brown, you wouldn't be sitting next to Donald Trump if you're a woman. You would feel extremely intimidated and you probably would give him a wide berth. And I think that it's, for men, it's just, for me, them knowing that we even have to think about this. This is from the moment that we step out the door. I mean, I remember being taught by my grandfather, his advice to me was don't put yourself in the position in the first place, because that was what we were taught when we were kids, which is, you know, don't have that one drink too many, make sure that you're in a lit area, you know, don't make sure that if somebody's following you, cross the road. And it's like, well, these are all putting the onus back on women. This is not our problem. This is a wider societal issue. That why don't we just teach people from the ground up that they shouldn't behave in this way at all?
It's the reason why you drive, isn't it? Is you get a driving license and get a car so that you can be responsible for your own transport home and not have to worry about public transport or taxis.
Yeah, I mean, there's another example when between my husband and myself, we were talking about traveling on trains, and he said, "Oh, you know, when I was young and I was at university, I used to get the train and I used to have a nap if I'd had, you know, a couple of drinks, a couple of sherbets too many. I used to have a sleep on the train. By the time I got home, you were all fine." As a woman, you would never consider falling asleep on the train, even in broad daylight, because you just don't know what's going to happen. So I think that everything around making, you know, any place a safe space is absolutely valid, and also just making everybody feel included. I think it's funny because I had the reverse angle from a guy who was working for a transport company recently. He said, "Becky, I'm so afraid of putting a foot wrong. I need to ask your advice because I want to invite a female colleague from another organisation to lunch. Yet I don't know whether or not she'll think that I'm asking her out on a date." And I just said to her, literally say, "This is a work thing. I'd love to meet you for lunch. If you want to bring a colleague, that's absolutely fine. If you don't want to meet for lunch, I totally understand." I said, we have to be careful that we are not becoming so hypersensitive that we don't function as human beings anymore. I said, but equally, it's just asking if somebody's comfortable with that. Some people will be. I mean, I had a whole, you know, career in sales. We go anywhere, meet anybody for a drink. That's who we are as salespeople. But it's just that's confidence that builds over time. There are other women out there who I spoke to in my last company. The woman that ran HR, she was in her late 50s, and she said, "I don't know how you ever go into a pub or a restaurant on your own. I have never done so, and I never would do." She'd never had a meal alone in a restaurant as a woman in her late 50s because she was too afraid to do it. And this is, you know, just still endemic in organisations. One of the things Sarah and I talked about yesterday was exclusion. Women are excluded by golf days. So if you have no interest in golf, in sales, as I was, they would just not invite you. So, well, you don't like golf anyway, so we're not going to bring you. oh, would you like to go to a spa day instead? We'll send you to the spa. We'll pay for you to go to the spa. And I'm like, I don't like spas either, really. And I
do like spas, but what you'd lose then, you'd get the reward part, but you'd lose the networking part.
Yeah,
the point about that golf event is to talk to the other people there.
It's very difficult to swing a club in a sauna as well, isn't it?
Yeah, you tend to get arrested. I think you probably get arrested for that. But
can I ask a question? It's always a bit, as a man on this sort of debate, I almost feel like I've got to defend of the position a bit, which is a bit, not what I'm trying to do. But I think it's fair to say that obviously not all men are in this camp. It's a spectrum, and the fact that probably some of us are on this call as men, probably is an indication that we're not necessarily as bad as others on some of these offences. How do you think, getting this message to the other end of the spectrum on the male side of things, where they're a lot more nervous about meeting women, or a bit more misogynistic, how can we wrap up the messaging to make it a bit more accessible? I don't know if it's the right word. Do you see what I mean? It's almost sort of softening the message to make sure people understand that actually it's I don't even know what question I'm asking, but you see where I'm going with it? It's quite difficult for some people to understand.
I don't know how we bring people on board who are from the minority, and I think it's a very small minority community, who are actively causing the troubles for lots of women. But I do have a suggestion around allyship, which it applies to both men and women, which is some of the microaggressions like hip eating and mansplaining. It's one of the most infuriating things when you're in a meeting and you speak up and make a suggestion, and then everyone goes, maybe, or they just ignore it. And then 5 minutes later, a man goes, let's do same idea, same thing you just said. And everyone goes, oh yeah, that's brilliant, let's do that. And what you can do if you're an ally, male or female, is for a third person. This is the important bit though. It's really hard if you were the person who made the original idea. If you go, yeah, I just said that, everyone's like, yeah, really? But if you were listening, jump in and say, oh yeah, that was that really great idea from Sarah 5 minutes ago. So what you can do is, because I think up to now, I totally agree that it's a tiny minority of people who certainly cause the problems with any kind of intent. But if men who are either meaning to cause trouble or who are just unconsciously not thinking about what they're doing, just calling their attention to it very gently, as in, oh yes, that was a really good idea from Sarah, so not saying anything negative to them, you can reinforce the idea that, oh yes, Sarah's ideas are valuable, and we should ask her for her opinion more often, perhaps, possibly. You can do things when you're in a team meeting to encourage not just Sarah, but anyone in the meeting who's being quiet to speak up and, oh, what are you thinking? You haven't said much today. So you can do things around being more inclusive and calling it out when you see it that should make it harder for people who actually do want to be awful to be it. I think recent governments in the UK have made it easier for people to think, oh, they don't need to worry about the rules, or that, there's that whole sense of, if you're set an example, it makes it easier to tip one way or the other. If you're set an example to be an ally and be supportive and call out the contributions made by people from minorities, that you can do, and you're helping the overall picture.
Okay.
I think there's an interesting thing that I would say here, which is the very sort of feminist part of me would say we don't have to dress it up, because we've been, subsuming this behaviour for far too long. So the very kind of progressive part of me says, tough tackies, mate. This is how we felt. If you have an issue with somebody coming out and saying this, then that kind of means that there's definitely some work to do from your point of view. In terms of how you kind of best sell it to people who are on the misogynistic kind of scale, is you're never going to, because you're not going to be able to influence people that, can't change their behaviour or won't. And I think it's about providing guidance around what the future is going to look like for those organisations if they don't embrace this change. Historically, the way that we've tackled it in engineering is actually by saying, look, if you don't have a diverse workforce, you won't be as profitable. you won't be able to attract new talent. Gen Z will not come and work for your organisation, because if you think we're calling it out now, you wait till Joe Watts' generation gets on this, who's on this call, who works with me. They won't put up with it. The women who are younger will not put up with it. They will call it out sooner. They're very, actually, at the moment, the people who are running fairly misogynistic organisations are on borrowed time, because when you can't start to recruit, you're going to be punished so greatly that you will go out of business if you're an SME. So this isn't a case of a choice anymore. This is a push that technology has made. You know, look at automation of lower paid jobs, which are, you know, usually inhabited by women. Will actually give women more choice to walk away from those, you know, 80 hours a week shackles and low paid jobs if they want to develop themselves. So I don't even think it's a choice, and I don't think we have to tiptoe around it. I just don't think you can. I think we're past that stage now.
Yeah,
I think that that's what they need to know, which is, if you want to, and this is business at the end of the day, if we're talking about a business is business, and it's, if you don't adapt, you will die. It's as simple as that. And it's not a popular, you know, I'm not known for my party invitations off the back of delivering this message, but then now I'm not here to please people anymore. I've done that for 25 years. In other organisations, that's what I've been paid to do. But now it's a case of, can we persuade people? I don't think you can if they're that far down the line. Can we provide guidance? Yes, we can. Hence what, you know, Sarah has very eruditely said previously. But I don't think that we as women now have to compromise on the messages that we're delivering because people won't like it.
Can I stitch someone up a little bit on the call? Emma, I know you're all over this, and I think it'd be really interesting to get a view, a non-tech or engineering view of how prominent this is in legal.
Yeah, okay. So I would say I'm really fortunate in a way that lots of people aren't, in that I've managed to kind of climb my career ladder quite quickly. I've not experienced any of the, not any, but I day to day haven't had the experience of being squashed down in a meaningful way that I would, you know, it happens occasionally, but it doesn't happen. And our firm actually happens to be quite female heavy in the general sense and at partner level. So it's probably not accurately representative, but I would say as an industry, probably in the last 10 years, there are a lot more women coming through at the training level because they're taking the exams and things. So I think there's that thing that Becky said about the further generations on, even from me, that will keep coming and the balance will shift. But it's obviously historically very male heavy. Certainly a lot of the bigger firms, very male partner heavy from the top. There's also a very fixed culture generally in lots of places that, I mean, we kind of have dress down now and we work from home and we're all really flexible, and actually the pandemic's enabled us to get on board with that, but lots of law firms don't, and there's a very old school culture. You know, I do have people of a similar age to me that during their training had sexual assault issues and things like that, and harassment in a meaning, you know, come and stand over here because you're wearing a skirt, I don't like it when you wear trousers, you know, there was still, and that's 7 years ago, 8 years ago in some of the bigger firms. So it's not a problem that's gone away in that sense. What I would say is, in terms of, and I think generally not just in law necessarily, and I don't, Becky and Sarah obviously, you know, jump in and tell me if you agree or not, I guess, but I think there is a kind of a middle ground in that there's a huge chunk of people that just don't really consider the issue at all. So it's not that they are particularly misogynistic and they're not particularly against it, but they're just completely inactive to it and oblivious to it. So, for example, when I went to a similar sort of talk about one of, you know, this sort of topic previously, and inclusivity, and we were thinking about it in a work context, and I was sat at the pub with a group of friends, obviously pre-COVID, and a lot of them were blokes, and we sort of having a conversation about walking home, and it was stuff that they'd never considered. So one of them went, "Oh, I'm just going to walk back through the graveyard to go home," and I turned and said, "I would never do that. It's completely pitch black. It wouldn't even occur to me. And if I was walking anywhere, I'd probably have a set of keys in my hand." And he was absolutely baffled that he'd never even considered it. And we had it kind of got into a much bigger conversation, but it was all of the things that we kind of said, well, what did you get to? Because that's what we got taught when we were at school. You know, that's not something as an adult that because I know somebody who's experienced it, I do. It's that's what we were taught when we were little, and they just never had that. And so there's stuff like that, the practical stuff, that I think what this particular chat came away and said was, actually, that's really interesting, because I'd never really considered it. So I think a huge part about inclusivity generally for me, and I think it applies to law and I think it applies to other sectors too, is about trying to consider it from the other person's viewpoint and to give that kind of safe space and the voice, which is a lot I know Sarah and Becky have already said, but the kind of opportunity for that to be talked about, and for people that maybe haven't considered it to consider somebody else's viewpoint. So it's that I can't really say that personally I've had a huge number of issues. I get the odd male client that doesn't want to work with me because they don't think I can do my job because I'm a girl, but few and far between, to be honest. Most of the time it doesn't really affect me, so I'm very lucky. But I think I would say the kind of silent middle is kind of a problem. That is probably an easy way to start chipping away at that, and to make more supportive environments. If you can get more people to just even consider one element of the different kind of diversity issues, then that's somebody that's a little bit more informed and maybe a little bit more on board and more of an ally, to use the term that Sarah's put on the talk, I think.
Okay, thanks.
Quick question to Lisa. Lisa, have you got any insights on this as well? Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, it's when I was younger, I worked for like big corporates, and I mean, I'm design, so actually when I went to uni there was only 4 girls doing graphic design and 25 blokes. Now that has changed, it's very different. I mean, I've got 2 daughters, and they're 25 and 22. Their attitude is completely different than how I remembered starting out when I finished uni. It was very, if I was going in as a junior designer, it was like, oh, Lisa, can you make the tea? But they wouldn't ask the guy that was next to me. That wouldn't happen now to the same extent. I know my daughters would tell them to sod off. So I think the next generation is very, very different. I mean, a lot of my clients are very male orientated. So I'm like Becky, some of my clients are construction. They're doing a lot of work in the construction industry to promote women. They've actually got women in construction as an organisation now. So that has changed quite dramatically. And I've got a lot of clients that are IT, and it's very, very male orientated. And that is majority of the CEOs are males. So certain lines, and I know from my daughters and my, their friends and things like that, at school they're not promoted. It's like frowned upon if you want to do woodwork. Well, why shouldn't you do woodwork? And that sort of thing, oh, well, we should go into home economics. No, if you don't want to do home economics, you can go in something else. And I think that is changing quite a lot in the next generation. I mean, it's like Joe wouldn't think of it to the same extent as probably our generation would have done.
Yeah, and I think that the actual problem might be a generational problem. And actually, in my experience, it's, if you're looking at where the sticking point is, it's probably Gen X boomer. Yeah. And that's where the sticking points are. So if it's a generational education piece, because I do believe that, millennials and below view the world totally differently and are here for a totally different purpose. But the thing is, like everybody, boomers are aging. And what we're seeing, especially through the work that we're doing with SMEs, is the fact that with the University of Portsmouth Business School on the Help to Grow programme, we're seeing boomer generation businesses being handed to the next generation, and their children and their sons and daughters are like coming in and questioning everything, quite right, which is why don't we have any diversity? Why are we not profitable? Why has our money, I mean, I had one IT company come to me recently, and they have gone from 4 million turnover business to 2 million in 18 months. They've halved because they're just an all male boomer company, and unfortunately it's not going to end well, but it's too late now to do anything. because the preparation just wasn't in place pre-pandemic. So I think the pandemic has highlighted a lot of these things in terms of businesses that perhaps were struggling before, or weren't as diverse, or weren't as financially stable as perhaps people thought they were. And when we certainly look at profitability in companies that I've worked in, the margins are so low that they're just stacked on debt. They're just facilitating their borrowing each month and their wage bills. They're not making any profit. And that's very prevalent in businesses that are very male dominated as well, is they're literally just running things and keeping the conveyor belt running. But there's hardly any profit to be had in businesses that, in construction, the margins can be as little as 7%. And in engineering, we were looking at infrastructure projects making less than 8% gross profit. So we just stopped doing it because we weren't actually making any money. And we identified different areas and different markets. So this is about profitability. This isn't just sometimes a nice thing to do. This is about, if you do it, you will make more money. You'll have a more balanced outlook, a more balanced business, a better place to work, and a better way of actually attracting and retaining talent in the future. So it's not even a nice thing to do. It's the common sense thing to do. So you shouldn't need persuading, but it's difficult. Change is super difficult. But I think allyship is a great place to start. I think it's and I think that's how it should be positioned, which is, in order for us to make these changes, we need help. We will ask for help. Women, we have to ask for help. We can't do it all on our own. And I'm very blessed that in the past, most of my mentors, weirdly or not, considering the markets I've been in, have been men. And they have been brilliant mentors. So this is not a vilification. And I don't get, like I said at the start, in order for women to win doesn't mean that other people have to lose. It just means that we have to have an equal voice and we have to have parity. And some people are truly uncomfortable with that, and we're not going to change them. We're not. And those kinds of people are never going to come on this type of call, because it's just delivering a message that people don't want to hear.
Is there anyone else who wants to make any comments or questions? I appreciate we've only got like a few minutes left. So is there? I'm a bit surprised that Alex hasn't asked a question.
I was going to say, you can never get between me and a microphone, can you? I find this conversation very, very interesting, because through my career, and I was a career IBM exec for nigh on 40 years, I never really came across diversity in a negative connotation, negative situation. But I do appreciate as I've described it, the future is female. I'm possibly one of the least woke, most un-PC people you'll come across, but I have two grown-up daughters. I have a mother, I have a wife. I had a female PA who was absolutely fantastic, right? So I had a cadre of women around me. So I know the future is female. Couple of observations reinforce things that have been said. My oldest daughter, she's now 27. She was a trader up in the city on one of the financial desks. She was the only female, and she was the youngest trader. A very machismo environment. And she had men all around her, waving there, bleeding as much as they could, right? And she phoned me up one Sunday, very, very upset, because she was being essentially bullied. And we talked it through, and I said, what are you going to do? Are you going to complain? And she said, it's not the environment where you can complain. I'll be encouraged out the door straight away. I said, right, so what are you going to do? You're going to confront this, right? You're going to be more bloody misogynistic and sexist than they are. Right? The first thing you're going to do, you're going to go out and buy yourself a bottle of perfume, because they were farting all around it. And the next one that does it, you're going to spray their ass with Chanel, right? And I guarantee they'll only do it once. And that's exactly what she did. The other thing, they were having a go at her because she was only allowed to do million pound trades, right? And the dealers kept on coming on. We got to place 1.5 million. She said, I can't do it. And they'd have a go at her. And I said, you're going to play the sexist card here. You are going to, and apologies, folks, you're going to hold one of your breasts up and say, the problem I've got is this one can do 500,000, this one can do 500,000, right? That's all it can do. If that's not good enough for you, go away, right? And when they're confronted like this, these guys are bullies, right? If as a woman, you've got the balls to stand up and do that, right? then you can confront these bullies. And she did. And I think it reinforces a point. And I think it was Lisa said it. The generation of young ladies coming through at the moment, many of them are very ready to stand up and say, this is not on, this is not on. Now, I put my credentials on the floor as not being particularly woke and PC, and I find allyship quite a difficult thing to get my head around, but I will not tolerate blokes, and I use the term blokes because that's the way they behave, boorish blokes. I will not tolerate their sexist thing. And what I do, I call them out. And I will say, stop being a prick.
Yeah.
Now, when someone like me says that to another bloke, right, that pulls them up.
Mhm.
And so what some of the allies like me who are, older and find it a little bit more difficult to get our head around, right, there is an absolute responsibility on us to call the pricks out, right? And I think if we've got the generation of women coming through who are prepared to have the confidence in themselves, and you got the old grey hairs like me who are prepared to call out, no, that is not acceptable, right? You are being a PRICK. I think for me, that's very important. And the other bit of advice I've given to my oldest daughter is, and I think it reinforced possibly by what Lisa said again, when you find these misogynists, they're having a go at you, not because of who you are, it's because of what you are. And that is very, very unintelligent. And when you understand that, you can have the confidence to confront and stand up for yourself a little bit better. Now, I don't know if that's a view that's accepted, but it's kind of something I feel comfortable with, behavior I understand and behavior I'm prepared to put out against my misogynistic friends. Comments?
It's interesting.
Sorry if I've ruined your call, Phil, but no, you didn't.
No. But I'm quite glad you sort of went off in that direction, because it's interesting. The problem we've got is there are a load of idiots in our world, who just haven't got their head around it. And it's interesting. We're all making the point. So I've got two girls, 24 and I've got 25 next week, and 22, and and I'm hopeful that because of the way they look at the world, a lot of these problems will just get designed out as some of the more misogynistic type people in our industries go off and retire or whatever, and coming up through the ranks, the attitudes are changing. What I'm worried about is those attitudes might be changing, but I don't think our education system is necessarily delivering the attractiveness of technical skills to the industry that we need, and that's going to take, as you say, it's a generational problem, but it's just systemic. It's a societal problem. I actually don't know how to fix that, and I think that'll be, some of the stuff we're doing with the education guys. Unfortunately, Debbie hasn't joined us, but the education establishments need to maybe step up a little bit here and take more active interest in encouraging a broader range of gender and other sort of minorities, whatever you want to call, get a broader range of diversity in all subjects of education.
The fundamental thing needs to be taught, and the older IBMers, and I know there's a couple of ex-IBMers here, the older IBMers will know it, respect for the individual. If you in business operate with respect for the individual, right, that addresses so many things. And if we can encourage that down through the education stack, respect for the individual.
So firstly, I'd like to say thank you, Alex. Just thank you for being there and for doing this and for being such a great dad. Your daughter's world sounds like mine did very early on in my career, and it's a very lonely and isolating place for somebody young and female to be in. So thank you for that. And what I would say is part of Sarah and I having a voice, and Lisa and Emma and Casey and all these other women, is that when you see other women that have gone through what you've gone through who are older, you realize it is okay to stand up and speak out. And the problem has been in the past is because the patriarchal structure of business has been that we should be silent and we should just be grateful for a job, which is part of our generation. That you should be grateful to have a job, you should be grateful for the opportunity, because you're working twice as hard to be thought of as half as good. Hence, alluding back to what Sarah was saying about female managers won't be seen out on coffee meetings or drinks because they're working 4 times as hard to be, to get the same results. I think to close off what we're talking about tonight, there was one of my quotes from my last boss, who said, "I hire women, Becky, because they work twice as hard for half the money and they're more loyal." And that is what we're still up against. That is what we're still fighting against.
Most of that statement was very good, though. I hire them because they work twice as hard and they're more loyal.
Yeah, and
two-thirds of that statement is cracking. The third that is not good sits on the employer.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think when there is a lot of change, there's a lot of systemic change in the education system that has to happen. But also we need to actually show younger women that it is okay to not be okay, because we never had that. I mean, I remember crying in the toilets, multiple occasions when I was in my 20s, because I was outperforming all the men and they didn't like it. And every month we would go to the sales meeting, and our female manager always used to say, "I think it's a joke that you boys come into this room thinking that you're ever going to beat her." Yet they were convinced outside or in the pub that, "Oh yeah, I'm going to get you this month, Becky. I'm going to have you, going to finish you off, my target." And then I just wouldn't say anything. I just was again the quietest person in the room, because you cannot compete with that. There's a brilliant Disney Pixar video short film in answer to your question. If you want to really persuade somebody, I'll send you the link for it. It's about a character that they've invented called Pearl, and it's a whole little professionally done Disney Pixar social commentary on what it feels like to be a woman in a male-dominated organisation. And we showed it when I was up at WeWork on a women in construction type event a few years ago, pre-pandemic, and we showed it to the male audience, and of course they loved it because they thought it was a cartoon. And at the end of it, they all sat there quite silently and went, "Oh no, that's what our workplace is like, isn't it?" And all the women in the room went, "Yeah." And then they sort of went, "Oh, now we need to do something then, don't we?" So really it is education around why we're doing it. What is allyship? Why should it be done? How does it affect profit? How does it make people feel? And that's a much better way of getting buy-in.
I'd just like to pick up on a point someone made about that it's quite isolating for women. It certainly was for our generation, but I think the millennial and younger generation that are coming up now, it's not just the women who want equality, it's the men as well. Like your colleague Joe, Becky, if we've got everybody fighting these battles and assuming that everybody can reach similar levels of potential, the world's going to be a wonderful place.
Yeah, I think you're right. Ending on a positive. I appreciate we're a little bit out of time. I mean, that generationally, you're right. I think there is some positive manoeuvring, but to the point that Becky made earlier, we shouldn't give up, but it's going to be difficult to persuade some of the entrenched attitudes. And I think actually, from my perspective, in terms of TechSolent being enormously selfish, I really want to leverage Sarah and Becky and other people we've got on the committee to get some of the messages into the tech education and younger generations to support a longer term strategy to balance things out a little bit. Like I said, I'm really aware that we've massively run over time. Becky and Sarah, thank you ever so much. Really, really useful. And thank you to everyone for attending. I think in reality, we've got a long way to go yet, but it feels like we've all got an attitude or an outlook to try and fix this somehow. So the more we talk about it, the better. And again, thank you very much for that. Unless anyone's got any final questions, I propose we bring it to an end.
Yeah, just a quick note. I've got the Disney Pixar link in the chat for you. So if you are having very difficult conversations with men, generally, doesn't tend to be women, then pop them that link first and say, just watch this, and then tell me what your thoughts are. And I think that then promotes that imagination a little bit more as well, and it takes the pressure off.
Perfect. Thanks, Becky.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, guys. Look forward to next month. I can't remember what we've got next month, but it will no doubt be similar quality to this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Really interesting.
Thanks for your help.
Thank you.
Guys, stay safe.